live, baby. Dinner at Duke's. We're back.
Oh,
Episode 6.
yes, baby. And if you're listening to us, I think we're going to have a little double episode for you guys. Am
We
I
are.
right
We
about
are.
that, Matty boy?
Oh yeah, one of the lost episodes is coming out.
Oh, yeah.
Although I
So you
gotta
got
admit,
five.
it wasn't really lost. It was I just didn't edit it.
Yeah. So you
Had a
got
big
5 and 6, a little double whammy.
double
But that's just
whammy.
how we like it. We like a double whammy. We would like coming to Duke's with the collars up, vibes out. We're having a good time.
We're having a great time, and we love good news too, Jake. Hit me with it. The ocean's
hmm
getting cleaned up.
Yeah, so I figure we start with some good news today. Yeah, we could start with the ocean. You want to start with the ocean or the hearing aids? What's the move?
Hearing aids, actually. We can't do any of this. We can't hear, man.
100%. So you tip it off, and then I'll sort of color it out.
Millions of
Like, oh,
Americans will soon be able to buy hearing aids without a prescription. Now, the crazy thing, Jake, that I saw was hearing aids without a prescription are like 1,000 to 6,000 a year. I
that
mean,
is
I'm
crazy.
thinking our iPhones are like 1,000 and they last a few years at least. I'm still on the iPhone 8, so I mean, this thing's been like $100 a year at this point. But I mean, these
Mhm.
hearing aids 1,000 to 6,000 a year without a prescription. Now the article's a little complicated. It's like, hey, we've been campaigning for this for years. Now basically
Right.
you don't need a prescription to get hearing aids under insurance. Is that the base way to understand this? Like if you don't have Medicare, if you're not covered, if Medicare doesn't cover this, you can still get it covered by insurance.
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway from it anyway was that, you just, all of these, well, not all of the hearing aids, they did make a distinction between certain kinds of hearing aids.
Okay.
But just the fact that, they're becoming easier to get, I think is an obvious win. I'm all for, easier, more access to, helpful devices like a hearing aid obviously can be. So I think this is a pretty straightforward win that we could, regardless of where you're coming from, I don't see any downside.
Yeah, I mean we're spending more money, but the cool thing about the senators Chuck Grassley, Republican Iowa, and Elizabeth Warren, Dem Massachusetts, we know her, Pocahontas. They came together on this. They're kind of leading this. This, that little bipartisan feel good thing. Am I a hearing aid expert? No, but what I can say is, look, we're not bipartisan on much, but apparently we are on hearing aids. So
Yeah. So, bravo for them, man. I mean, yeah, without insurance, it probably will be more expensive. That is something that you picked up from the article. But I know they were talking about increased competition being a possible result of this. So hopefully that'll drive the cost down, right?
yeah. Both my grandpas have hearing aids. No, actually, one of my grandpas has hearing aids. They both should. One of them literally couldn't hear. I remember I went to visit. We're watching sports, and he just turned it to full blast and was like, "Turn it up." I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"Put your hearing aids in." I feel like some people don't like to wear them, but my one grandpa's kind of accepted it. He can control it on his little Samsung Galaxy phone. It's actually pretty cool with the Bluetooth. And
That
my
is
other
cool.
grandpa, he still won't wear them, but maybe this
Mhm.
will convince him. Maybe this will push
Maybe,
him over
man.
the top. So
Yeah,
good
get
news.
them in aisle 5 at CVS coming your way soon.
Yeah. All right. So the oceans. We've got this really cool ocean cleanup. They're starting to clear the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Now, this apparently is like a mass. How big is this Great Pacific Garbage Patch? It's like a massive thing of plastic between Hawaii and California.
Yeah, and I went to the website of the company whose name I believe is the Ocean Cleanup, and the size that they said was twice the size of Texas, so enormous. And again, talking about obvious wins, I think no one likes trash, and I don't think there's really a way to argue for there being trash in the ocean. So another one of these obvious wins in my book. There was an interesting. I linked you to a YouTube video where they came out with the second version of this system.
Yeah.
This
You got,
company.
you got stamps on this baby? 8 minutes long. What are we rolling with?
Well, we don't have to show the entire video, but the thing that I found interesting actually was the top comment where the guy basically was saying, "Oh, just the fact that it took a private citizen to do this. I mean, the government should be doing this." And
Right.
that
Yeah.
kind of goes to show, I mean, that's kind of what our show is mostly about anyway, is, how incompetent the government is. So, I mean,
Is
it's
that our
almost, I think so to an extent.
defining topic at Dinner Dukes? Yeah.
But that comment, I mean, it's just kind of the opposite of how I think. So I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, I was shocked that you even shared that. And then I was like, okay, it's the opposite. You don't think that the government should really be doing anything.
Well, yeah, I think at the end of the day, 100 years down the line, I think it should dissolve. But certainly I have more faith in a private citizen than I do in the government. That is for
Right.
sure.
I mean, if the government, if anything, the lesson isn't that the lesson from the government being incompetent isn't, oh, the government should be doing this. It's like, I think we have a lot of history where the government wouldn't be competent at this. The government is probably competent at industrial complexes, and that's about it. So if there's an industrial complex to monopolize off of it, like the military industrial complex, the affordable housing industrial complex, the homeless nonprofit industrial complex, something like that, they'll thrive with that. But something that would be a net good, I'm skeptical they'd be great at ocean cleanup. Maybe they would. And, yeah, the ocean cleanup. I mean, this nonprofit seems like it's doing a great job. Like they're going after this, and I'm seeing this water here. So it's not this size of Texas. This is what kind of all the plastic sits in, but it's not like a landmass. Can you walk on plastic? I mean,
no, and what I really like is the fact that they're actually showing in the video, but also on their website, them actually pulling trash out of the ocean. So, and I think they call that proof of concept. They're actually showing that the device does work and that they're able to take out large amounts of trash out of the ocean, which is phenomenal. And maybe we could put the link in our description, if you want to donate, again, I think this is like we're not sponsored, of course. And, I don't know anyone who is affiliated with the company, but, I'm rocking with this.
I love it, man. I'm excited. This is really cool. I mean, I'm a surfer. I live in California. I bought a car in Florida in 2020 with the goal of moving. And I came back, and there's just nothing quite like the Pacific. And so I support something like this, cleaning up the Pacific. It's amazing. It's beautiful.
Yeah, 100%. But enough good news, right?
Apparently, that's what we could come up with. Now we got to harp on the government and one of Jake's favorites. I don't mind going along with this too. These woke people, this is what they're up to.
Mm-hmm.
Becca here, Becca Beckery. That's a good name. Some ableist words. This is on Twitter. Some ableist words you should probably cut out of your vocabulary because they're ableist. Idiot/idiotic, crazy, differently abled, dumb, insane, lame, moron, psycho, specially abled. Never heard that one. Stupid. There are many more, and if anyone wants to add some, feel free to below. Now, we had a bit of a spiral because my guy Jared Dixon here found a tweet from Becca. And apparently, we're going to go there. Explicit, if your kids are listening, cover their ears. Why do people, from Becca Beckery, why do people cease to see that she is a fucking cunt? So, we got Becca Beckery, all people cunts, but no idiots. What do you think, Jake? Go off, man.
Well, I wanted to couple it with the other post from the some writers association talking about disabled people. Were you able to pull that one up as well?
Sure, we'll go after all of it all at once. Yeah. So there was a writers association, boom. The ADCI, the Authors Society of Authors, I don't know, but what they said is, they're launching an award for work by an author who self-identifies as disabled or chronically ill. And now it must be a fiction piece to win this ADCI Literary Prize, and it must contain one or more characters in this fiction piece that are disabled and or living with chronic illness.
Yeah, and hopefully we can put this into the visuals for the pod, because I think it's very important to note this post on Twitter. I saw both of these posts on Twitter in quick succession. They're both still up. They couldn't pair with each other. I mean, they pair with each other beautifully. Just the fact that they use the wording. I mean, this might be a little snowflake of me to even point this out, ironically, but they're insinuating that people can identify as being quadriplegic. I mean, isn't that like deeply offensive to people who are actually like unable to walk?
Well, you know what's
I mean,
crazy
it's kind
about
of
that
crazy, right?
is there's that body dysmorphia. I forget the name of it. What's the thing where you want to chop off your limbs? I mean, it's, you know what I'm
I
talking
know.
about? Have you ever heard of that?
I don't. And you can maybe look that up, but if you look at the actual
Body integrity
article,
identity. All right, I got it. Body integrity
uh,
identity disorder. So there's people who want to be disabled. What's twisted about this is like I don't know. Are you, if you're getting really woke, this is woke Matt coming at it.
mhm,
You're not
I want
protecting people who suffer from body integrity identity disorder. There are people out there who want to chop off their limbs.
mhm.
It describes the extremely rare phenomenon of persons who desire the amputation of one or more healthy limbs. Now, a prize like this, where you are encouraging disability, rewarding, not encouraging it, but giving a reward specifically for it, woke Matt says you're tempting people who suffer with body identity integrity disorder. What do you think?
Well, I think it's just bizarre. I mean, to be fair, if you look at the actual article that kind of goes into more
Like,
depth as to what the award is about, it doesn't use the same verbiage. It says plainly, if you are actually disabled, you can apply. But just the fact that this came across someone's mind and that they feel no shame in keeping it up as a post, I mean, I am a little bit lost for words. I mean, on the one hand, it is deeply offensive, I think, to people who, are paralyzed. For me to say, yeah, I identify as paralyzed today. I mean, what's more ableist than that? I mean, I think you could
ooh,
make the argument that it is very ableist to, kind of parade around like you're the same thing just because you feel
ooh.
like, I mean, I don't know, it's just very bizarre to me. But it's kind of, I think the end game and why I connect these two things is on the one hand, you could sort of make stuff up like you could be, paralysis identifying, which I can't, I'm going to keep repeating myself, is just so bizarre and deeply offensive. But on the other hand, this Becca Bakery, who I think is a Twitch streamer, and basically her entire identity is, being, is intersectionality, being this, being that, being LGBT, whatever, and,
Okay.
being this and being that, and having a certain kind of color hair. And, that's just sort of the audience that she wants to attract. So, go for it. I guess in general, I have no issue with that. But I think in her case, does she want us to be able to say any words at all? Because, again, woke Jake coming out for a second here. I could say, you have to stop saying, oh man, you're going to kill it. You have to stop saying that because that's, making a joke out of death. I could easily say something like that.
I'd say
But
that's
it's,
serious, man.
yeah, I mean,
Woke
death
me
doesn't
says.
get more serious than death, right? So I could easily, I think if I was trying to be woke, say something like that. So, I mean, just the idea that, we need to keep erasing words from this list of words that we can use. Again, it's on the one hand very bizarre. On the other hand, I think it's completely missing the point. I mean, who cares? You shouldn't care if you're, you know, healthy and mentally sound. This isn't something that should bother you. That's at least how I see it.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's been going on since we were like teenagers. We kind of became adults in the woke era, so I feel like we're super familiar with it. From if you're analyzing it psychologically, it's like this is something that can give you meaning. This is something that can give you purpose. This is something that you can, if you're finding, justice in this, or you're finding things that are really important to the human heart, like we want to strive for justice, we want to strive for meaning, you can feel like, oh, I'm protecting people from having hurt feelings. I'm
Right.
I'm compassionate. These are all things you can find out of doing this, but when you actually break it down, it's so shallow. So, or
And then, and I didn't mean to cut you off. And you pulled up that post, which I didn't even see, where the guy, screenshot something that she said in the past that was like, completely, and she was being, not nice at all. So just to contrast those two things, I think is also beautiful because, part of me thinks they're just trying to score points. It's not really how they carry themselves. When they're,
Right. It's telling
I
something. I
assume,
think you were spot on.
yeah, at this point, I'm so disillusioned with these kinds of people that I almost assume that in the privacy of their own homes, they are just completely berating, people and just being the worst and not being nice and using bad words. That's kind of the assumption
Right.
that I have nowadays.
Yeah. Listen, are we good on this? Do we hit it?
I think so, man. You just want to give them a little taste of what people are like nowadays, right?
Yeah. Well, now I'm
The
gonna give them
vocal
a taste of what
minority.
now I'm gonna give them a taste of what the FBI is like these days. If you guys didn't hear, Trump's Mar-a-Lago compound raided. There was an affidavit. There was a search warrant. FBI coming in for top secret info, which is fascinating to me because the president essentially can declassify anything. They are the top national security leader when they're president. So anything he would have took would have been when he was president. It's like not like he ran in the top secret archives and grabbed stuff after they inaugurated Joe Biden. He was already out of there. So my question is, and I'm not going to spend the time, dilly-dallying on this or that. This goes all the way at the top of the court, and all the experts have said, hey, at the end of the day, Trump's lawyers are going to make the argument, he's the commander in chief, all classification runs through him. And then because it's national security, if you're familiar with high school history, hey, there's a lot of things Congress has supposed to have power over. But one thing from the very beginning of it all was national security was kind of a thing where the president had a lot of executive power. So that's what it's going to boil down to. I've already seen some liberal tweets, left tweets, I should say. I'm still working on that. I cede too much ground to them with the whole liberal left thing. But they're saying, hey, certain aspects of classification, even the president can't override. And that was something we were talking about on our last pod. Well, then who controls that? Is it the bureaucracy? This is like, I don't know if you remember, Jake, when Trump first got in office and he said he's going to release the JFK files. Do you remember that during the campaign?
Of course.
Got in, started to do it, got really close, was doing it. And then he's like, oh, it's not happening anymore. And then, well, first he asked and they said no. This, I should have pulled this up in the episode. It's a bummer, but off the top of my head, they're like, no. CIA's just like, nah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and because
they're implicated. Because they're implicated, Matt.
Well,
go on.
We don't know. But what's interesting is it's like it expired while he was in office. And then he said release, and then and even Trump, and who knows what the politics are behind that. I'm sure guessing what he's like, he'd probably want it out, but he's got other interests at hand. It's complicated. He even gave in and was like, yeah, this isn't coming out. So I just wonder at the end of the day, what the play is here. People speculate on all sides. They say, the FBI raided him to kind of taint him or, taint him. These are the political takes, taint him so that he's weaker when he runs for president. And then the other side is like, no, they know that this is going to strengthen his base, and they're more afraid of DeSantis running because they think DeSantis could win. So I think that it's such a twisted world out there. It's like you can make an argument they raided because they want Trump to run because they think Trump will be easier to defeat than DeSantis, and then you make the argument that they're trying to remove him because every candidate he's endorsing is winning elections right now. So I mean, we can get into the nitty-gritty of the actual raid if you want, but that's kind of my big zoom out thoughts on it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, let's just say that he did do something nefarious and totally illegal and deserving of jail time, which I don't think he did. But if we're willing to go there for just a moment, let's just see, for the sake of transparency, let's see all of the documentation that went into that raid. And that was I should know much more about this, and I don't. But one of the things that I saw about this that I found interesting is that there was someone in the intelligence community that I think went on MSNBC or one of these talk shows, and he criticized the use of the term raid, which by definition is what occurred. And now they've been sort of pulling back on the use of the term raid, which I find interesting. And we just got off of the subject of, vocabulary and semantics, but, I think the use of euphemism here is totally negative and corrosive. So I, of course, take issue with that. But yeah, let's see all the documentation. Let's see the affidavit, Matt. I know the search warrant has been released, so I did take a look at that, and I'm, no expert on search warrants, so, I can't speak on that too much, but
Right.
let's
It's
just like put it all out there. And all of this talk of, oh, because of national security, we can't release this, and it will, that's always been BS. I mean, especially nowadays, of
talked about it
course,
last
that's BS.
Yeah.
We talked about it on the last pod. It's when people don't want to talk about stuff, when the intelligence community doesn't want to, bring their shady dealings to the light, they cite national security. And this is no different.
And thankfully, with the internet age, people are less and less impressed by that line. I think that's another aspect of positive news that we can see in this story is people are less and less impressed by things like this.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. I mean, I don't know how else to put this other than this is what the FBI does. I mean, I saw a clip from not Rand Paul, but his father saying it's almost, this was like in the 90s or like 91 or something like that. And certainly in the 90s, he was commenting on the actions of the FBI. And he said it's almost like they were designed to spy on American citizens. And I couldn't agree with that more. I hate the FBI. I hate the CIA. I hate the intelligence community. They don't do anything.
They are, or do you hate everything that they do?
No, we should scatter them to the wind, just like JFK said.
Okay. Do you think any aspects of what they do is worth time?
No, because I hate the government.
Right, but do you
do away with the whole thing?
Do you want law enforcement?
Well, I was listening to Michael Mallon.
You're so aware of what they are in your mind, but they also purport to do things that a lot of people would want. So you have to separate what they purport to do from what they do. Now you're saying they don't do anything they purport to do. They do all these bad things. Let's scatter them to the wind. But I'm saying, would you even, if you could have a government agency that would do the things like stop terrorists, would you want that? Or like you said, in 100 years, would you just want to accelerate to private solutions for stuff like that?
Well, if we're talking about stopping terrorists, what we don't want is the Patriot Act, which was introduced by George Bush. If you don't know anything about the Patriot Act, please look into it. It basically ushered in the era of mass surveillance that we are dealing with today in the name of stopping so-called terrorism, which really means nothing. It can mean whatever the government needs it to mean in order to spy on you. So that's what we don't want. Do I think that we need policing in some capacity? Sure. I mean, they had it in the Old West. They had it in very free societies. There tends to be, even in the freest of societies, there tends to be some, form of, at least punishment, whether that's, in the very much the olden days, sending a member of the tribe, out of the tribe and putting them in isolation. That's a punitive measure, right? And fast forward to today, you have the government is the only entity that can police. In a very small, realms, you have private policings, I suppose, like at malls or, at the university we went to, they had, very dumbed down police guards. And I don't mean they were stupid. I mean, they couldn't really do anything.
Sure.
So I think, in the words of Michael Mallon, who's an anarchist, who I love, and it's really turned my world upside down. I think, maybe 100 years down the line, we have competition in the world of policing. If one police force is not doing the job well, you have someone come in who you can pay to do the job better. So I think that could be very interesting. I don't know how that would be.
Guards that Nancy Pelosi and other senators and leaders of the U.S. government already have private security.
Yeah, so I mean,
for themselves, the ones they actually trust.
Yeah, no, the people who call for, less policing, they have private security guards. So you can't really take them at their word. I mean, the people who are the most at risk, in dangerous neighborhoods, they want policing the most, according to a lot of studies.
Yeah.
So now we're talking about policing. Policing is a
No.
very interesting thing. I'm not completely back the blue. I know police officers in my personal life that I respect, white, black, and, all from all sorts of different backgrounds, and I respect them as people very much. But, of course, I should be allowed to criticize policing and, think it's good in some instances.
Yeah.
We just
Well,
need to have a new one. Go ahead.
You're an anarchist, or how would you define yourself? Well, because I just want to read. You mentioned the Wild West, and do
Yeah.
you know where outlawry comes from? What it means to be an outlaw? It comes from English common law, and because I read this libertarian book from a libertarian, and it's actually kind of a Matt's money market thing. The whole book's about why there should be free market money like gold rather than government fiat printing money. But he talks about outlawry, the origin of outlawry, and it was English common law. And this is back before giant prison systems, before the government really had the technology to enforce law. So, in the Wild West, you have a sheriff, but you don't have all the soldiers or all the police to really enforce the law. So you could have a judge and you could have two families, and the judge could give a verdict like, hey, you killed this guy. And there's no real government to enforce it. So the punishment could have been like, hey, you need to be this person's slave for 10 years to pay back, killing their brother. And they could say no. They could say, no, I don't accept that, because they weren't enforcing the government on you. And once you said that, you were an outlaw if you said no. And once you're an outlaw, there was no rules. Not just that family, but if you were marked an outlaw, anyone could come get you, enslave you, or kill you. So I just found that very interesting to think about, because that's that was a much more anarchical system, a much more open Wild West system. And I just had no idea that what we think of in the Wild West being an outlaw goes all the way back to English common law in the 8th century. Anyways.
Yeah, no, something about the Old West really scratches an itch for me. I really want to start watching old Clint Eastwood movies, to be honest with you, so I can really get a feel for what it was like, at least according to Hollywood. To answer your question, in the short term, I think I'm a centrist. If I'm anything, I'm a centrist, I suppose. In the long term, I am an anarchist. And this is a recent change for me. Again, Michael Malice, definitely look into him, guys. He's a total game changer. I don't think that the government is good news at all. I think it should be, in a peaceful manner, of course, dissolved. I think it hurts us way more than it helps us. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a recent example of how it's helped us. I think that they do this interesting sleight of hand where they say that they give us rights. On the contrary, I think they only deny us rights. And this is kind of a working theory for me, and I need to do much more research. But yeah, I hate the government.
Well, I kind of like that. That's kind of an inversion. It's like the fact that they're giving you rights in itself is something you object to. Like, you don't derive your rights from them, essentially, is kind of where you're coming from. Like, since I don't derive my rights as a human from government, then the fact that they're telling me that I have rights is like giving them power. Like, I don't accept that sort of way of stating things, I guess. Is that where you're coming from?
I mean, just think about it, guys. Do other people give you rights? No, I mean, if you believe in God, of course. And this is enshrined in the Constitution, this sort of thought process. God gives you rights. They're God-given rights. And you don't have to believe in God, but certainly other people don't give me rights. I see that as illegitimate. What am I going to do? Am I going to go out and start committing crimes? No, I think that we should be governed by at least an ethical framework, which again brings religion into the picture, or at least some sort of comprehensive philosophy. So there's such a thing as Christian anarchy. Leo Tolstoy, he's written a book on that called, I think, The Kingdom of God is Within You, which is very I think it was the Dead Sea Scrolls who kind of that sort of uncovered that sort of side of Jesus, where Jesus was sort of talking about how sort of the power comes from within and all this stuff. And I could be wrong about that, but I think the point is just sort of really challenge your first principles, your sort of baseline notions that sort of are almost invisible. We're taught from a very early age, so we're sort of given this framework in school, in history class, that it's a given that that there's a government that exists.
Yeah.
And maybe if you weren't in school, that wouldn't be a given to you, and you'd be more able to sort of question that naturally. So that's sort of been a process for me recently.
Yeah, I love that philosophically. Now I'm going to push back because I think there's a really good practical pushback to all this, and I do not have the same ideology because I think that a Machiavellian, extremely calculated person in the government could agree with you philosophically. But I think what drives national security, what drives the power centers of our government is always this justification. If we don't do it, then the other powerful person will. And there are people psychologically, and I've thought about this a lot, who are they want power. And there are people who want power in our society who are psychologically driven by power. There's people in China's society, and there's people in Russia's society, whoever they want to brand as the enemy. And they're always going to rise to the top of these bureaucracies and say, if we don't do the extreme thing, if we don't inject the Tuskegee airmen with syphilis, then the Chinese will do it, and they'll figure out some thing about an STD that can give them an edge in world power dominance. So all this stuff, I think, is always driven by you have to be in the pole position if you're an empire. And we currently are the most powerful, or China, it depends on who you're talking to. It's the most powerful nation. And our powerful people who are driven by all this and find their meaning in life, they find their, self-actualization literally as human beings from this power race of who's more powerful, who rules the world. It's literally like what their life is about. If not them, then they do it. And because I think that their human nature is the same around the world, I don't think Chinese culture is so different than American. I think that there's at least something you have to admit to that like someone somewhere is going to want to rule you. And that's kind of the inherent fallibility of man. So until we have some sort of maybe breakthrough, like the Renaissance or something, I'm not sure that we can get to that point that you described. But that's kind of what I've thought about. Curious what you think of all that I just
Well, I
said.
will say one thing, and to sort of round out this discussion on if government philosophically is legitimate or not. One of the arguments that, and I've held this at various points in my life, if there is no government, if there is no governing body, then there will just be chaos. There will just be anarchy. And I mean, it's something that we've talked about since the beginning of political thought, with the Leviathan, and sort of that era of political thought. I would say that if you look at animals, they do things that you may describe as mean, but they also do things that you may describe as nice. And I think humans are the same way. I do think that there is also this idea of people who just want power, and perhaps you need a governing body to sort of protect against that. A check or a balance against people who would just, if there was no government, they would just, try to take over everyone. I think if you have an ethical framework, I mean, you're a Christian, so you can maybe talk to this more than I can, but I think that ethical framework sort of functions in the same way that a government should work theoretically. It sort of, it keeps you from doing things that you shouldn't do. And, what's funny is the government is supposed to work that way. At least we've been told it doesn't.
Right. So that's the big problem is generally like our founding documents are pretty sweet, but do we have a deep state, and has it entrenched itself after 200 years? Absolutely. So we have a huge problem, and no one on the surface or the mainstream media wants to acknowledge it. And so we have a big problem that is very intractable, because we have all the documents that say all the right things, and we have a situation where what's actually happening has nothing to do with the documents.
Mm-hmm. And, part of the reason I think at some point the government just needs to dissolve is I think to an extent, unfortunately, the deep state, the intelligence community, these unelected officials that sort of run the show, it is very hard for me and you to defeat them, Matt. I'm not saying that it can't be done, but they wield so much power that I think, it's very hard in this current system to defeat them in a substantive manner, which is not to
Right.
say that you shouldn't have. And
Yeah,
I don't mean, go ahead.
The type of psychological profile it attracts is the smartest, most, not always, but a lot of them, these whip smart, extremely driven people who find meaning in that power. So I know that there's a lot of incompetence, and you can point that out, but my personal opinion is that it's not all incompetence, or it would have already crumbled. There's a lot of competence, there's a lot of whip smart people, and there's a lot of people who are very motivated by that work and find it extremely fulfilling and meaningful.
And that's not to say that people don't come through the system at one time or another and do good things. Lincoln, of course, freeing the slaves. It's hard to argue that that was a bad thing. Teddy Roosevelt, the great conservationist. People like to say that he broke up the monopolies. He did a lot of good things. It's hard to say that those two things at least were bad.
Sure.
So I do think that there were people who come through the system who certainly do good things, but
Right.
It's an entirely different discussion. Is the system itself salvageable?
Right.
And I think that's a discussion to be had.
Yeah, absolutely. And to round it out and to bring it back to Trump, it's like you were saying before we got into this massive conversation was that, you want to see the documents. And that's the point is, if you Google it on the news right now, the FBI lawyer right now put out a statement like, yeah, well, the thing is, if the affidavit's released, the whole thing's going to be blacked out and it's going to be rendered meaningless in the context of the courts. So that's where we're at, guys. If you want to find it out, well, it's just going to be all black ink blocked over the letters. So that's where we're at. That's the situation. And you have to ask yourself if you like that or you want to live in something different than that. Mm-hmm. Because we can have this conversation about Trump. We can have this conversation about the raid. We can talk about the affidavit that was leaked. The court order that granted the raid, not the affidavit. But if we don't have the context of what's going on here, then we can talk about the politics of it. We can talk about what if this or that, but we don't have anything to go off of because the FBI said, we're just going to black it all out. So
no, we need transparency. If Trump did something totally nefarious and worthy of jail time, let that play out in the public court. I want to see everything for myself. There's another situation, of course, Matt, that perhaps is more probable, and it's that the FBI, whereas in the 60s they were targeting left-wing groups, now they're targeting right-wing groups, and Trump is, certainly part of the right wing, at least in their eyes. So, I think it's certainly probable that they're just targeting him and trying to taint him, or doing something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's totally possible. It just depends on what side you're on. Like we said before, it could be that that they want this to rally Trump's base. We just don't know yet. But there's interesting plays on both sides. Anyways, there's all this tension in society. There's all this pressure. And I wanted to bring it back because we were having this conversation, and I just, for some reason, when we were talking about this in prep, I thought back to this piece in the New York Times that Jimmy Carter did. It was last year, 2021, beginning of the year, January 6th, a year after January 6th. And it was from Jimmy Carter, and it was Jimmy Carter, I fear for our democracy, of course, the former president. He says, 1 year ago, a violent mob, guided by unscrupulous politicians, stormed the Capitol and almost succeeded in preventing the democratic transfer of power. All four of us former presidents condemned their actions and affirmed the legitimacy of the 2020 election. So pause there. Now, the purpose of this piece is basically to say, I fear for our democracy. We all need to come together. We all need to have, we can't splinter. We don't want to have a civil war. We want to have unity. And kind of that's been the defining line of the powerful people in our society, is that we need consensus. And, I tweeted, I think it was like 2 years ago during COVID, I said, is the goal by the elites to make the nation more like California where there's less social strife. You have a clear majority of one political party, but you have incredible inequality. I mean, you have incredible inequality. You have the haves and the have-nots in California. I think that's more clear than a lot of states where housing's a lot more affordable. And I wonder, as they try to manufacture consent, and this has been going on since the Biden inauguration, is the nation going to become more like California? Anyways, so Jimmy Carter said that, they said all 4 presidents think the election was legitimate. So this piece is setting up for, hey, the point of this piece is to have everyone come together. Now, there's a bunch of people, he says, 40% of Republicans believe that violent action against the government is sometimes justified. So if that many people, you quote a study that says that many people believe that, then in your piece, you might want to say why the election was legitimate in my eyes. Now, it gets even crazier because he says, I personally encountered this threat in my own backyard in 1962. He's saying to election fraud. When, quote, a ballot stuffing county boss tried to steal my election in the Georgia State Senate. This was in the primary, and I challenged the fraud in court. Ultimately, a judge invalidated the results, and I won the general election. And to me, that's just the craziest thing, because he's writing a whole article about how everyone comes together. He cites, 40% of people don't buy any of this. They even think violent action against the government's justified. Like, people are really at arms. And, there's a lot of social conflict in the United States. The elites want to manufacture consent. They're fighting for world domination with other empires, and they need consent. They need unity to keep, the cogs churning. And I just think it's crazy. You could write a whole piece about that. And I guess my point is, this piece wasn't for bringing unity. No one who actually believes that the election was stolen is reading this piece, except for maybe me. But the point is, like, this guy then goes on to talk about when one of his elections was almost stolen. So to me, it's just like, I wonder, like, is there such cognitive dissonance within their own heads, or is it just like so blatantly, like, there's so many holes in what's going on here? I mean, I'm just incredulous at all of it.
Yeah, no, it makes me think a lot of things. I mean, questioning the integrity of elections is not new, Matt. I've sent you a lot of stuff on this. During the election between Kennedy and Nixon, for example, it was, rumored, and I know Nixon's team brought this to court in a lot of instances. They thought the election was stolen from Nixon. And it's very well known, maybe whispered about, but well known, that Kennedy did have the mob on his side in a lot of cities. His father was a bootlegger. So he did have mob connections, and that certainly helped him. And this is pretty well documented. You just said Jimmy Carter talks about how he, in his own backyard, was a witness to, fraud. I sent you something on Lyndon Baines Johnson.
That was interesting.
It was, I think it was in 68, not 68, but I think when he was running for Congress in his first election, he was behind by, I think, 2,000 votes, and then ended up winning by 68 votes. And there was
20,000 vote deficit.
And you guys can look up. Yeah, you guys can, of course, look at that article that we could put in the comment section. Also, Roger Stone, the infamous Roger Stone, wrote a book on this, Lyndon Baines Johnson and his sort of legacy, talking about how at one voting facility during this very election, there were double-digit amount of people who allegedly came in alphabetical order, all voted for Johnson, and all signed in the same handwriting, which is probably, fraud. Even in 2000 with George Bush, the hanging chads, the Florida recount. Right. This is not new. I mean, I sent you, and I think we should play the 2016 election, liberals in 2016 contesting the election. I think that's something that we could probably put in there for the people at home.
Yes.
Yeah, let's show that real quick.
Boom, boom, boom,
The
boom.
best campaign. You can even become the nominee, and you can have the election stolen from you.
How can you win with Russian interference, though?
That's
what
real
I'm
thing.
scared about in 2020.
But rightly.
Because I think he's an illegitimate president that didn't really win. So how do you fight against that in 2020?
You are absolutely right.
He's an illegitimate president in my mind.
Would you be my vice presidential candidate? Folks, look, I absolutely agree.
Trump didn't actually win the election in 2016. He lost the election, and he was put into office.
Yeah, it's Jimmy.
Trump knows he's an illegitimate president.
The president-elect, although legally elected, is not legitimate.
I don't see this president-elect as a legitimate president.
You said you believe that Russia's interference.
So it goes on and on. I mean, I thought that was good. We had Hillary, we had Biden, we had Kamala Harris. We had
Jimmy. They had Jimmy.
They had Jimmy. They had Jimmy Carter.
So I mean, come on, people.
So
again, I'm not saying that the election was stolen. There are people who say that the Democrats cheated fair and square. I think that's a lovely phrase. If you're willing to concede that this is something that happens in every election, they won fair and square. And, the means by which they, got around to winning the election, maybe they're illegal, maybe they are illegal. I don't think it's out of the norm, I guess is my point. So yeah, I don't know why this talk about 2020 being legitimate or illegitimate is so crazy and apparently brand new.
Right. That's what's interesting. That's what we were getting to, is like, it's being weaponized to a new level right now. Like, why is it being, it's still going, like, get them in. Well, it's different inside the Capitol for 10, putting people in jail for 10 years, but they're really fighting it this time. And I feel like it's because, people feel more threatened. People in power feel more threatened. Why else are they pushing back harder than these other times? If, as we pointed out throughout history, this is commonplace. This is human nature. This is, people conspire, people cheat, especially people who are attracted to power. Like, you want the most powerful seat in the world,
Yeah. And if there is a difference, Matt, it is, of course, January 6th. And again, listen, if horrible, terrible things happen on that day and, rioters killed people or, did this, that, and the other, they should, be punished. And I'm sure you agree with that. The question is, did that happen? I mean, I saw a story the other day about the infamous bombs that were planted, the pipe bombs that were allegedly planted the day of January 6th.
Yeah,
we still haven't seen any. We still haven't seen any videos confirming that. Which, unfortunately, I hate to break it to you guys, it probably means that they were planted by the FBI to make people look bad. And I know that might be shocking to some people, but that is a possibility. We know that Ray Epps was egging people on to, commit crimes. That he is probably an FBI informant. That, of course, they can't comment on Ray Epps. It's all classified. They don't need to comment on it. But so these things did happen. Ray Epps was present that day. The pipe bombs were probably planted. But again, I'd like to see the video. I'd like to. I want, for the sake of transparency, I'd like to see, some evidence for these things.
Yeah, here we go again. People have cell phones. People have the internet. In California, we have tons of propositions on the ballot. We feel more engaged. How engaged are we? That's up for debate, but more engaged than this. And people want transparency. They want to feel like they're invested in these things, especially in the era where you can see everything on your smartphone. So I think that's what's really changed it.
Yeah, and as far as consensus goes, Matt, I know you like to talk about consensus. I think one of the very promising things about the internet is how it's decentralized this gatekeeping of information. And what's extremely interesting is people would lament that fact when we went to school, right? Was, anyone could post anything nowadays. on their Facebook, they could say that something happened when it didn't happen. How horrible is that? I want to go back to the days where there were 3 news channels. I go the complete opposite way of that, which is to say, I love that, information is so decentralized. Of course, there's going to be issues with that. Any Joe Schmo can, in fact, post on their Facebook that something occurred when, in fact, it did not occur. But for the most part, all of this intelligence agency nefarious activity would have never come to light, you could argue, if it wasn't for the decentralization of information. I mean, the stuff about Vietnam barely came out. This stuff about MK Ultra barely came out. They sent a stack of files to the wrong facility and forgot about them. I'm pretty sure is what happened with MK Ultra, and then someone raided the office, like some thieves, some citizen journalist thieves raided the office and stole the files. So, it was it's luck in a lot of instances that we know about these old programs. But anyways, in the current day, I think it's a great thing that these, the information, the pathways to getting information nowadays, it's so decentralized. I think it's a phenomenal thing, but I do think that the elites fear that. Whatever that means.
I think
whatever the elite. Yeah.
I think it's decentralized so much. There's so much progress, but the goods of the goods, the best stuff is on lock. Why do you think Julian Assange is being extradited right now? Why are elections not done on the blockchain? Like there's still a lot of meat on the bone, if you will. There's a lot more to go. It's not all solved. We're not in utopia yet. Like there's so much more progress to be had if you're someone who wants more transparency.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
I think that wraps it. Let's do something fun. Too risky.
Yeah, let's do it, man.
Please, not if you avoid cohabitating first. Jake, do you live with your girlfriend?
I think you kind of cut out there. You want to repeat that one more time?
Yeah. Listen, little article Jake sent. Too risky to wed in your 20s. People are waiting until they're 30 to get married. Not if you avoid cohabitating first. So they're saying, if you avoid living together before, you've got a much better chance of staying together long term. Anyway,
so I think this is a study out of BYU, which
that's funny.
We love the Mormons, right?
Well, they do a lot, right?
Yeah, hopefully you could pull up the study that is that they have the link for in that article, because there's a couple of good figures in that study. I think it's just some food for thought. I know that hookup culture sort of leads us in the direction, at least in my opinion, I'm going to argue for the next few minutes, that it leads us in the direction of, if you're going to get married at all, which a lot of people question that nowadays, you should definitely wait a very long time. It almost goes without saying that you're going to live with your girlfriend or your boyfriend before getting married. It's just sort of something that happens. And if you look at, I think it's figure 5, Matt, that sort of, at least in my opinion, really breaks it down the best.
Yeah, we're there, baby.
Is it 25 to 29 years old is sort of the sweet spot in terms of age to get married? Is that what it says?
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
So why don't you break that down a little bit? I think it's, again,
so
it's
Jake,
pretty interesting.
It's on his iPhone, so you can't read it. But basically, it's we got the y-axis, we got annual probability of divorce. It's 0 through 8%. So you can see under 20, they're pushing 6% annually, the odds of getting a divorce. 20 to 24, they're kind of topping around 5.5. Now, 25 to 29-year-olds, regardless of whether they're religious, regardless of whether they cohabitate, they are the least likely. When you get married between 25 to 29, 4% annual probability of divorce. Now you pop the 30 or older, and you're back up to somewhere between 4 and 5%. So if you do wait, you are so conservative. It's almost like there's the really conservative people who get married, but they usually get married before 30. And then if you get married after 30, you kind of had your fun. I don't know. That's my experience personally. Is like the people getting married later. Not always. I have a pretty conservative cousin who just got married in his 30s. But you have less odds the longer you wait, is what this study shows. So 25 to 29 is that sweet spot. And there's no adjustment for being religious or non-religious, which I was kind of positing to you, Jake, is like, you know, if you're not cohabitating with someone when you're 25 to 29, because, you know, we're in that age group, kind of a lot of people live with their girlfriends or boyfriends, then you're probably pretty thoughtful about how you're approaching your relationship with someone.
Well, that's an interesting. So two things. One thing is the variables at play. We brought up the age. You know, it's 25 to 29 that seems to be that sweet spot for marriage. There's also this idea of cohabiting or cohabitation, which is living together prior to marriage, I think is the definition used by this study.
Yes.
So just for the viewers out there, that's something you should note. What I thought was interesting that you brought up, Matt, was the possible lurking variables. Yes, it might be that if you're not willing to share an apartment before getting married, maybe you're already sort of a type of person to be more inclined to not get divorced. Is that sort of what you were saying? Sort of maybe this lurking variable at play?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and I think there's maybe something to that. Maybe if you're more conservative and, you know, or of the mindset, oh, we shouldn't, you know, get an apartment together until we're married. Maybe you're the type of person who is not going to get divorced as easily because maybe you believe in, I don't know, the sanctity of marriage or the institution that is marriage more than the next guy. So I think that is interesting. This is sort of another thing that we were talking about before the pod was how this seems sort of pretty intuitive to you. And I don't know if it's intuitive to me or not, the findings of this study. Again, I think I've sort of been surrounded by sort of this culture, maybe living in LA, maybe, you know, being the age that I am, that you're supposed to get married super late, that, you know, it's pretty much a given that you're going to live with your girlfriend or your boyfriend. And that, you know, all of those things sort of may lead to a greater outcome or, you know, a greater marriage, not a worse marriage. And so this sort of flies in the face of that. But does this seem pretty straightforward to you?
I mean, it seems straightforward to me. My friends who have lived with their girlfriends, you know, they tend to have blowups. They tend to have disasters. Not naming names, but I mean, that's what I've experienced. And then my friends who are much more conservative and thoughtful, you know, I'm going to a bachelor party this weekend. Well, he did live with his girlfriend before. Conservative Christian guy. They lived together. Not until they were engaged, though. So kind of a tweener type of thing. Like they moved in together once they're engaged. And he's getting married in December, but very, you know, both conservative Christian. And they're in that 25 to 29 range. So, I mean, I'm kind of have a lot of conservative Christian friends because I'm Christian and conservative. But like a lot of them get married in that 25 to 29 range. So
interesting.
And, you know, in the 20 to 24 range, it's interesting. The spread between religious and non-religious is big. In between cohabited first and not, you know, non-religious and cohabitated before getting married, you're at 5.5% on annual probability, and religious direct marriage, so no cohabitation, you're down below 4%. So there's a much larger spread there. And, you know, the interesting thing, because we're in, you know, Matt's money market's always lurking. It only sounds like 1.5% each year, but that compounds a lot.
Yeah,
like a 1.5 spread over, you know, the life of a 10-year marriage, 30-year marriage. That's massive. So it's kind of a misleading chart. You know, you should take a 1% spread, 1.5% spread, pretty big if you think about the life of a marriage.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about this before we get into Matt's money market is, yeah, I sort of in the back of my mind when I was not too much younger, but I think a few years younger, I did hear a podcast talk about this topic, you know, specifically the sharing an apartment or cohabiting prior to marriage and how that can lead to a worse marriage. The argument, it was, I think, The Art of Manliness was the podcast that I was listening to.
Yeah.
And it's a good podcast if you haven't heard it. The guy was basically saying it's a slippery slope where if you share an apartment with someone, and let's say you share a pet with someone, your significant other, you start to share even a bank account. These are things that make it harder to get out of a bad relationship. So that was the argument that was being made on the podcast, was, you don't want to increase the barrier to getting out of a bad relationship. And, so that means not living with the significant other. That means, not sharing these things. The end result of not sharing these things in his mind was, if it is a bad relationship that you're in, you can get out of it much easier, which he saw as a good thing, which I think is pretty straightforward and, thought-provoking. So yeah, not a mind-blowing study, but, something that I came across and I thought it was, worth our time.
Right. And the interesting thing, you said BYU put this together, their Institute for Family Studies. They write the entire thing from the perspective of women, which I thought was interesting because, my girlfriend's a religious conservative Christian, and like their perspective is like, it's so interesting to read from the perspective of, they're like, well, so you don't get your heart broken or have this big regret. It was just interesting to read it that way. And I think that's generally right. If you're giving, it kind of makes sense. If you're giving a man everything he wants, for him, it's almost like you essentially are married to him, but without the strings attached of commitment, which I think can set a lot of women up to be taken advantage of or hurt. So I think that's directionally right.
Yeah. Do you know about stress tests?
No, tell me.
So this is something else that I've read about. A stress test in your relationship. It could be something like going on a trip. If you want to stress test your relationship, go on a trip with your significant other, because it'll really show you who that person is. Which I think is true. I mean, when you're, lost in a foreign country, you're going to really lose the mask for a second.
Yeah. What'd you find out, Jake? You went to Amsterdam.
Well, that's her native country, so she was cool as a cucumber. But
did you get it somewhere else?
I think for all of us, it's interesting. You should do stress tests. I think it's, something worth mentioning. I think it's important to, even if you're not going to live with your significant other, maybe you don't have to go through that stress test. Maybe you can do other things like, going on a trip with them, or, building IKEA furniture. That's stressful.
Yeah.
You should do that together.
Okay. So
yeah,
you still
that's my takeaway.
Yeah, we are still dating. We're not like full old school, like crazy right-wing trad, like that side of Twitter where they're like, back in my day, people didn't even date.
Yeah.
Still
that's pretty
trying
wild.
to quantify a little bit, Jake. All right, I got you.
We're just trying to find a balance.
I like it. Listen, man, I saw this and I was like, this is just bizarre. It's like it never ends. It's like a never-ending leak. And Tyler Carditis, that's kind of funny. I don't know if his last name, it's like myocarditis, but bizarre that the State Department rented out a 5-story Upper East Side mansion to Jeffrey Epstein from 1992 to 1996. Does the State Department rent out property to private citizens often? Seems weird. So again, what do we know? Why do we keep finding all this stuff in like legit newspapers, Daily News? So anyways, this whole story kind of broke down that this guy was renting it. And Epstein ended up sub-renting it to this guy.
Yeah, subletting it.
Subletting it for like $20,000 a month. And Epstein was making $5,000 a month in profit, and this is the 90s, so that's a lot of money. That's like probably 100. What do you triple that? 180K instead of 60K is probably right. 5K a month's like 15K a month then. So he was profiting off this. He's subletting the State Department apartment that he was renting for $15,000 a month. Anyways, it's just like, for me, it's like I just wanted to point this out. Nothing serious. We don't have to go down the whole Epstein rabbit hole, but like it's just another drop in the bucket. it's like another stone in someone's shoe. Like I'm never gonna make someone think something. You have to see it for yourself. It's just like the Matrix. Like, do you want to see it or do you not want to see it? And to me, this is another thing where it's like it's in the eye of the beholder. Do you want to, look at this and have a question mark go over your head, or do you want to just look the other way?
Yeah, the Epstein stuff is pretty radioactive. I mean, it's so interesting. So just a quick summary on this, because, it is just sort of a little, interlude before our Matt's money market. I'm itching to hear your economic take this week, man. But on Epstein, this article, it does show that he had some weird connection to the State Department, which the State Department, my understanding is, it's a U.S. Department of the government that deals with other countries. So basically foreign relations. So, the conspiracy theorists might say, if he has a connection with the State Department, maybe he's an agent of the State Department, which is, of course, crazy to say. But everything related to Epstein is crazy.
It's all crazy. Yeah, I mean, I think it's also common knowledge. No one's spilling the beans here that like the State Department's cover for a lot of other agencies. A lot of intel gets run out of the State Department, but a lot of intel gets run out of everything. So
yeah, so if he is an agent for the State Department, let's say, maybe his entire purpose was to gain leverage on foreign officials, or officials both foreign and domestic, for nefarious purposes. Again, it's just interesting stuff, and to your point, it's something you either want to see or maybe it creeps you out too much and you don't want to see it.
Exactly. Another one like that, revealed after 32 years, top secret picture of one insider calls the most spectacular UFO photo ever captured. We'll show it right now. Again, just a quickie. But UFOs are interesting. And now this is where you got to think, what's the angle here? Is this, I mean, it looks compelling if it's not doctored. Now, this is one of those where this is either like world breaking news or it's not. So to me, it's like, well, everyone kind of reads it and they're like, well, all the sourcing is government, British kind of intel government sourcing. Why are they putting this story out there? Why after 32 years is this declassified? What's the angle here is sort of the question. So for me, as someone who's, been an investigative journalist, it's like, I wouldn't feel comfortable like fully trusting the story if I didn't go visit the sources myself personally.
Yeah. And apparently there are two chefs who snapped this photo, I think is how the story goes. And then they sent it to an...
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say they sent it to a news outlet who quickly sent it to the Ministry of Defense. So this is a British story.
Yes.
So this is not, American jurisdiction here. But, I mean, my angle on this is maybe similar. It's, there's probably such thing as an alien. But does that have any bearing on life on this Earth? I guess is the only thing that this makes me think, like, what's the point here? I think a lot of people get hyped off the idea of there being aliens, and of course there's aliens, and we must be obsessed with aliens, and maybe that's true, but I think it was Eric Weinstein who put it best. He's the famous mathematician who has ties to Peter Thiel. He said, whatever interest the aliens had in us, it quickly went away and it turned into fear once we dropped the atomic bomb.
Sure.
Because I mean, if anything's going to send reverberations throughout the universe, it's the freaking atom bomb. So if there are aliens, they're probably thinking...
They got UFOs. They got UFOs. They're probably just making sure we don't blow ourselves up. But
well, that's what I'm saying. They're probably, if they're thinking anything, they're thinking that, these humans are crazy. We better keep our distance here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are we, like... You tell me, Matt, are we going to meet aliens in our lifetime? I mean, like, does this have any bearing on us whatsoever?
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, there's so many stories out there and a lot more and more of them are government connected, right? There's a lot of big push the last few years on releases from the U.S. government, stories out of Baja, California, San Diego, Virginia, that have actual photos and things. And why are all of these, stories government sourced? Obviously, you got all the angles. You got, it's like they're having more transparency, which is probably the least likely. Then you got, their military programs. They had massive breakthroughs. They found alien technology, whatever route you want to go down. And then, you just have, people are just seeing aliens. But I mean, it's hard to believe. It's hard to believe the mainstream story when all these stories are the most tangible stories are coming, fully government sourced, former Royal Air Force officer with the photo he kept hidden for 32 years. It's, I don't know if this podcast and, you've expressed so much skepticism about the government and the best evidence for UFOs is coming from the government. I think it bears a skeptical mind to at least hold these things with a grain of salt.
I have a question.
Yeah, go
Matt,
ahead.
I have a question. Why are they telling us about UFOs, but they won't release Ghislaine Maxwell's client list? Why one and not the other?
Sure. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So that's exactly what I'm talking about is like, you got to have a healthy, what's going on here? Does this actually make common sense with everything else I'm seeing out in the world? Like something doesn't quite add up. So I think it's, fascinating, amazing photo. I think we might have to fly out to Britain and report it out ourselves, go knock on these guys' doors. So,
I mean, again, maybe this is good news. Maybe we're back to the good news segment. Maybe the government is doing something good for once and, just wants us to know about aliens.
Yeah, I love it. So,
who knows?
All right, last story. We're doing Matt's money market.
Yeah, let's do it, man. Just end it off on an interesting, well, it is kind of heavy, but an interesting note.
Yeah, but listen, breaking video of a hostage situation in Lebanon at a major bank in downtown Beirut. An armed man is holding bank staff until they release his deposits. He says they're 210,000 US dollars. So let's watch the video and then we'll get into it.
بعدين في مودعين اثنين مثلك جوا كمان انتظرهم بسام طلع واحد طلع انا واحد.
So it's crazy. He's just like standing there through the door with like an AK. And Beirut, Lebanon, this is not like some, this isn't Syria. This isn't like, I don't know where else you compare it to. It's like Turkey. It's a real place with a real economy, but it's got a huge financial problems. And when you can't get your own bank, you can't get access to your own money, what do you have? You're at the complete mercy of your government. And I thought this story was crazy because he went to the bank finally because his father needed surgery.
Yeah.
So this is where your pocketbook, he's a 42-year-old food driver, Bassam Hussein, and he held 10 people hostage during a 7-hour standoff last Thursday. Entered the federal bank with a shotgun, and a canister of gasoline, fired 3 warning shots, locked himself in, and just didn't give up. He had some 210,000 trapped in the bank, according to the Associated Press.
I think he ended up getting like in the neighborhood of 50,000 out.
Yeah. Now it's saying in exchange for what his lawyer said was 35,000 US, but enough to pay for the surgery. And what's crazy is a mob came to support him because this isn't just him. There's tons of people with daily limits on how much they can withdraw from their bank. And, services like surgery are expensive and you can't afford it. So Matt's money market this week, it's no crazy math. We did that earlier with the percentage differences on, average divorce rates per year, annual average, odds. But the lesson is Matt's money market, super simple. If you don't custody your own money, like in crypto, you don't really own it. They can shut it off at any moment. Your access to your bank, it's gone.
Take us home, baby. Why are there banks? Do we need banks? Why are they holding us hostage?
We need banks. Banks are a good thing. Even if you had a Bitcoin standard, you'd have Bitcoin banks. You're not going to get away from it. Yes, I like the line from Will Durant, one of my favorite historians. He said, "The men who manage men manage the men who can only manage things. The men who manage money manage all." And of course, money is just fungible power. You can pay people to do stuff that you don't want to do. You can, you have the power. So yeah, we need banks because we need people to transact. We need people to give loans to each other. But we can have much freer banks. We can have banks that aren't at completely the behest of the Federal Reserve. But I mean, the lesson that I wanted to say is, hey, there are things like Bitcoin, there are things like gold where the value is inherent and it's your responsibility to control it. And that is a trade-off. If you mess something up and someone steals your gold or you lose your Bitcoin, it's gone forever. Or you can roll with the bank like these people in Lebanon and then you get locked out. Or you can be privileged, and live in the United States the last 50 years. But, I think everyone who watches this show or is paying attention is the tides are shifting. So you may have to adjust and adapt a little bit. The dollar's still dominant. But you're seeing tides changing, so be flexible, be adaptable, and just think about it.
Well, Matt, here's my question. This is something that I thought about recently because I heard a phrase that I had never heard before.
Yes.
I heard, separation of blank and blank. We've heard this before. Separation of church and state, for example. Have you ever heard of the phrase separation of money and state?
I've said it on this podcast, Jake.
Okay,
my mic unmuted, but I've said it before.
Okay, so I love that. Why don't we do that? Why don't we separate the state from money?
Well, I love the idea. Now, the thing that they're going to fight about most is national security. We talked about the pole position, like, hey, I need my military-industrial complex to make sure I'm more powerful than China, more powerful than other empires. I don't see how that gets resolved. But in any other area besides military might, raw power, I see only upside. You're going to have better capital efficiency. They're going to have way better checks and balances on the government, way less waste and abuse when the, private social consensus around money, whether it's Bitcoin or something else, the government has to seek that money out. They can't print it themselves. Imagine how much more integrity the government's going to have if they don't have the power to print their own money out of thin air.
And maybe that's the point of this podcast, man. Maybe this episode in particular. It's all about decentralization of power, of information flow. No more gatekeeping. Okay. We're anti-gatekeeping. We're anti-gaslighting. We're HEOs. We're boy bosses. We're city boys. We're going for the win. We need things to be decentralized.
I love that. There's always going to be
more consensus.
There's always going to be people with the psychological profile who want the power, want control. But we can't have technology that evolves to put a check on that.
Yeah. Don't be easy to rule. Be hard to kill. And see you on the next pod.
Boom. That's it.